Since our days are numbered, why take precautions? Well, first I want to make sure we understand that it is in fact true that our days are numbered. The Bible says that God has laid out our days before any of them occurred. You can look at it this way. I think there's nothing wrong with looking at it this way, that in essence our lives are stories that were already written before we live them. Now, I happen to be a person who believes in the sovereignty of God, that He is sovereign over all things and controls all things, so that's not difficult for me to make that affirmation. But there are some who would agree with me and make that affirmation, who then take a unhealthy or jump to an unhealthy conclusion that doesn't necessarily follow from it. And that is simply this, that because our days are numbered, there's no reason or sense in taking any kind of precautions. It's sort of a Groundhog Day approach where we're going to die on a particular day. So what we do between now and that day doesn't make any difference. So we might as well take risks. Now, I've heard from someone who was a pretty vehement pro-vaxxer that they had heard from multiple people who were anti-vaxxers that they had made this particular argument. Well, I don't need to get the vaccine because when my number's up, my number's up. And this person looked at that argument and said, well, heck, why take an aspirin? Why go to the hospital? Why wear your seatbelt? Why lock your doors? And I thought to myself, that's exactly right. That's a very, very good rejoinder to a very, very bad argument. But just because someone makes a bad argument in defense of a particular idea does not mean that the idea itself is wrong. I can say, well, you should root for the Pittsburgh Steelers because black and gold are the best colors. Well, I don't know that that's actually demonstrably true. There are much better reasons for me to argue in defense of you rooting for, the Steelers. Shouldn't be choking on saying root for the Steelers. What I'm trying to get at is this. Well, let me explain something to you about God's sovereignty. It is absolutely true that God has ordained whatsoever comes to pass, and He has numbered our days. But it is also true that God has ordained the means by which He brings about the ends. Just last night we had our last study on the book of Ruth that we put out on Facebook Live. And in that study we talked about the sovereignty of God. That if the point of the story of Ruth and Naomi and Boaz were simply to get Ruth married to Boaz and having Obed, who when he grew up had Jesse, who when he grew up had David, if that was just the point of the story, God could have just plucked Ruth right out of Moab, and it came to pass that Ruth the Moabitess found herself standing beside Boaz at the altar saying, I do. But God determined to work through the marriage to Mahlon, the death of Mahlon, and her father-in-law Elimelech, and the traveling back with Naomi, and all the gleaning and all that went with that. God chose to do it that way. Well, in the same way, when we take precautions, we are availing ourselves of the means that God has established by which He may, in a sense, prolong our lives or get our lives to that point where He's determined they will not end. Which means, by the way, that the precautions that we do take won't stop death from coming if that's what God has ordained from all eternity. And a failure to do so won't make it come, but it may mean that that's the means that God has determined to take your life. God may say, well, here's what I'm going to take Mr. Smith's life, and I'm going to do it this way. Mr. Smith is going to get this backwards understanding of my sovereignty such that he takes a very passive role with respect to taking precautions. And because of that, when he tries to fly off of his roof, he's going to plummet to his death and die. That could be God's plan. And he will die on the day he was supposed to die. So, appropriate precautions, absolutely. Absolutely the right and proper thing to do. and that in no way diminishes our commitment to or our belief in the absolute sovereignty of God over all things.